1.4 Explore, a revised procedure. The purpose of this lesson is to determine how to design a consistent procedure, identify sources of error, and to understand the importance of determining controlled variables in an investigation. Students will redesign their investigation from Section 1.3 using a procedure sheet to define specific variables and create a more consistent procedure. Students will begin Section 1.4 by discussing different changes to make their procedure more consistent. They will discuss make a list of procedural differences that they may have noticed during the first investigation. Then they will use the procedure sheet, and as a class, guided by the teacher but driven by the students, they will complete a consistent class procedure that controls variables in order to make sure that the class is doing a reliable and consistent procedure. So for example, the class will determine what ramp height they will release their truck from and how high their cardboard ramp is. The class might decide 12 centimeters. That would be recorded on the procedure sheet, and everyone in the class would be expected to set their ramp at 12 centimeters. Vehicle A, which is our truck, the class could decide that the position for Vehicle A might be back wheels at the top of the ramp. Might be one important detail. There might be other details too that the class would add, but this might be one detail. Again, this is not for the teacher to come up with to make the consistent or correct procedure. It is merely for the students to look at what were some of the differences from 1.3 and how could we come together to create one class consistent procedure. The students may decide that back wheels are 2 centimeters for Vehicle B from edge of cardboard ramp. They may decide it's 1 centimeter. They may decide that it's flush with the cardboard ramp. For the release of Vehicle A, they may decide it's a push or a release. Whatever the class decides, they should record on the sheet and then are expected to follow that procedure. This is about consistency, not necessarily whether it's going to bring correct data for later on. It's about getting the class to all follow a consistent procedure for all 10 trials. Once this procedure has been developed, students will actually run their investigation and record their data for all 10 trials for the distance Vehicle B traveled. Again, recording this data is going to be in centimeters. So students will complete something similar to this, where they will release their truck to hit their vehicle and record the distance that Vehicle B or the car traveled. And this is what students will be doing. They should do this 10 times and then be recording the distance in centimeters of Vehicle B. Students may be recording the distance from the back wheel or the front wheel, but whatever distance they record, it needs to be consistent across the whole class. Once students have completed all 10 trials, they will participate in a share, which will allow them to reveal their data and therefore will again graph it on a histogram sheet, a class histogram sheet. So once each group collected their data, the teacher, which is you, should ask the group to share their data, and all data should be graphed on one histogram sheet. As the groups report their data and graph it, the teacher will then bring out the histogram from Section 1.3 and compare the data points from Section 1.3, where each group was doing their own procedure, and there were many differences in the procedure and even many differences between trials where things were not consistent, and compare it to the new data from the revised procedure. The class should see a lot less variability, a lot smaller range of numbers. The class should also see a higher frequency of specific numbers. So the graph should show higher frequency, but less variability and less range. Once students have seen these differences between the histogram from 1.3 and the histogram from 1.4, they will complete a short Add to Your Understanding in experimental design and review vocabulary such as error, variable, and controlled variable, where they will look at how they were able to reduce the amount of error by creating a more consistent procedure and controlling their variables. If there is still variation in the histogram, you might want to include an additional discussion of what other sources of error could be. It could be the wheels on the vehicle, or the pattern on the floor, whether there's a dirty part of the floor where class had a clean part of the floor. So there might be some other sources of error that could be brought up in a discussion if there still is variability. In the last section of 1.4, students will complete a little reflect and connect on the challenge organizer, on looking at what have we learned and also what do we want to know, because as they're moving forward, they have their procedure down, but they're still not sure why there's been changes in data for the car accidents between year after year. So we're kind of connecting back to the challenge, going back to the challenge organizer. If the students need extra space here, it might be helpful to get an additional sheet of paper. And also, when the students fill out on the challenge organizer at the end of 1.4, what they have learned, you could make this a short formative assessment where students would have to express the understanding of why having a consistent procedure is important, why getting accurate and reliable data is important, and how to develop that consistent procedure by controlling variables. So at the end of 1.4, this is a really great time to have a short assessment on consistent procedures, to connect the students back to the challenge, to say, okay, we now know how to accurately measure the distance that vehicle B travels, but now we have to figure out why there's some differences between year to year. Why has there been an increased number of accidents? And get students to start to brainstorm in a think, pair, share on their challenge organizer of what do we want to know, or what do we want to know more.